The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher is produced in the first instance as a radio show, and it's aired on stations around Australia. Due to music licensing restrictions, copyright-protected music tracks in this podcast edition have either been replaced with royalty-free alternatives or removed entirely.
The Clear Signal with Steve Visscher.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's time for another week of The Clear Signal, folks. I hope you've had a great week, and I'm certainly looking forward to spending the next hour with you and presenting a couple of great interviews and playing some great music too. clearsignal.com.au is the website, of course, and our contact details are all on that website if you want to drop me a line at any time. Love to get your feedback, and of course, if you've got any story ideas you'd like me to cover, that's the place to suggest those to me, and I'd really appreciate you sending those through. I've got a big show coming up. I'm really looking forward to this. I've got a great guest on the line, which I'll talk about in just a few minutes. Coming up a bit later in the show, we're going to be talking to longtime radio man Terry Daniel. Terry is the proprietor of Australian Independent Radio News, and he's done many, many other things in his career besides. So I look forward to talking to Terry about some of his career highlights and perhaps where he thinks the radio industry is going these days. And maybe a little bit self-indulgent to be talking about radio when I'm talking on radio, but it's always interesting to see where that's going. My first guest, though, is a man who falls into an interesting category for me. Have you ever stopped in life to ponder what might have become of old friends? You know, those the friendships of our youth, I guess, the ones which at times probably seem so enduring, the ones you thought would never, ever end. And but sometimes life goes on and they fade as we grow up, and we all move in different directions. And, well, that's really just life, isn't it? Well, I was prompted to think about this myself recently when the name of one such person from my long, long past popped up, and he's gone on to have a very successful career in politics. Roger Jaensch is the member for the Tasmanian state seat of Braddon, and he currently holds the ministerial portfolios of Children and Youth, Community Services and Aboriginal Affairs. And that's all really interesting, Roger Jaensch, but let's talk about our great times at the first Scoresby Sea Scouts. It's so good to see you.
It's great to see you, Stephen. Thank you for looking me up. It's brilliant to see you, and looking forward to this conversation for some time.
I've got to say now, I was researching a news article for a news bulletin I was putting together a couple of years ago, and I forget what the story was about, but it concerned something that was going on in Tasmania, and the name of the local member popped up, and I sort of breezed past it and then sort of paused and got back, and I thought there can only be one person on earth with that name that I know that lives in this part of the world, and lo and behold, it's you.
There's actually another person called Roger Jaensch, who over the last, I suppose, since you and I were together at the Sea Scouts, on occasions through my career, I've bumped into another Roger Jaensch. And on two occasions, that happened when I booked into a hotel, where I went to check in at a hotel and was told that my wife had already collected the keys. And this was before I'd had a wife. And turns out that there was another Roger Jaensch who'd booked in and got there before me twice. And you wouldn't believe it. Same spelling and I think same pronunciation as well, but working in a different area. And we're aware of each other. I sometimes get complimented on his wildlife photography, which I'll take.
Yeah, I'll take that, yeah. Well, there's actually a rather famous sound producer in Hollywood, apparently, by the name of Steve Visscher, so I'm quite happy to take all of his kudos as it comes along.
Just turn up and accept his awards.
Roger, you're in Tasmania now. When I knew you, of course, we lived in the southeastern suburbs of Melbourne, where we both grew up. And in the 1980s, we spent a lot of time in the Scouts. But you've been in Tasmania for quite some time and have obviously embraced the lifestyle there and gone on to some great service.
Yes, my wife, Steph, and I have lived here since 2000. We've both lived here longer than we've lived anywhere else now, and we've raised three kids here, two of which have moved back to Victoria for their studies and careers. One of them is still finishing her secondary schooling here. But, this is our home now and has been for quite a while. And, we love and miss other parts of the world and the country where we've lived. But, we're Tasmanians now, or we're not going to live long enough, Steph and I, to be properly considered locals, but we're a Tasmanian family now.
I married a girl from a country town in northern Victoria, and I think it's kind of the same up there. And we've been married now for 32 years, I think it is now. And I can identify. I don't think I'll be a local ever up there.
Yeah.
Tell us a bit about the area where you're living in Tasmania, Braddon. What part of the state does that take in? Because Tasmania, I couldn't think of a more beautiful part of the world to move to.
It is absolutely beautiful, and we're in the northwestern third of the state. So if you picture your map of Tasmania, if you take a point from midway along the northern coast of that heart-shaped island, and everything pretty much west of there is in my electorate. And whilst I've been a member of Parliament since 2014, we first came here in 2000, and my work was to work right across that same region with the local government councils of the area. So that's all of the northwest and west coast, including King Island. And it's beautiful and green, rich agricultural soils, great complex mineral deposits as well, but also huge areas of wilderness, parts of the World Heritage Area. We like to think all the best bits of Tassie are in our area.
Yeah, well, I could go with that. Except for one, Roger. Did you know that there is actually a small island off the coast of Tasmania called Visscher Island, which I think it's only a small craggy outcrop, but I'm claiming it.
You claim that craggy outcrop. I look forward to visiting it one day, and I'll send you a picture.
Now, Roger, you've actually had, looking at your bio, you've had quite a career in tourism. Is that what brought you there originally?
Not just tourism, but tourism was part of it. I came to Tassie in 2000 when I got a job here. The 9 councils of the northwest and west coasts. There's 29 councils in Little Tasmania. Some would argue that's too many. That's another discussion. But the thing is that they were, by any measure, small and remote, and very difficult for them to have a voice in Hobart or in Canberra when it came to lobbying for money and investment and services that their people needed. And so they decided to band together in such a way that they could get a little bit of critical mass, and they could get a big enough voice that they could be heard. And my job was to set that up and to be that voice for that region. And we managed to get good resources out of Hobart and Canberra, and we managed to be able to, when there were, as usually there are, different brands of politics in federal and state politics. Sometimes it's useful to be a broker in between who can talk to both sides.
Yep,
and
sure.
Put a deal together for a region like ours. And part of that had to do with tourism. Also, things like infrastructure development, health services, programs to help young people commit to finishing their education and getting a job. But tourism has always been part of that, and it's a really important part of our region's economy now.
Taking the step into politics is a big one. I mean, it would be a big consideration for anyone. I suppose through that work that you were doing, perhaps that made that decision a logical step for you. Was it a big step to take?
It was a huge step for me personally and for my family. This is a thing, you don't do it alone. You can't do it alone, and everything that you do in politics is visible to everybody and reflects, on your family and your kids in particular. And Steph and I talked about that a lot, and we realised also that, we would have to see how this thing would go, because we knew people who politics didn't work well for their family and marriage, their kids, and we didn't want that to be a problem. So we agreed to do this together to see how it would go, but family always comes first. To the credit of my family, and good luck, my kids have gone on to be successful at what they do. They're following their passions. They're doing well in life, and that's all we could hope for. They don't seem to have been too badly messed up by their dad having his name on the side of his car and sometimes being criticised in the media and things like that.
Yeah.
And maybe that's also that the Tasmanian community here is, quite an intimate place. Yeah, people have a go, but they also respect that you're a family, you're a human, you got kids, and the people around us have got a lot of access to their politicians here, but they also keep a respectful distance from prying into people's personal lives we've had a good experience of that.
It's interesting. My wife has said to me many times before that I should stand for local council, but I don't know whether I could put up with that sort of scrutiny. And of course, circling around a little bit, I think my first call, if I was elected to my local council, would be to call for its abolition. So we might be on the same page there, Roger. I don't know. Hey, you mentioned your car. And I've seen on your website, that is a very unique, is that the four-wheel drive that I've seen on your website?
Yes. It's not my only car, Steve, but I think you're talking about the
looks like an
old Land Rover
the old
that
Landy,
I drive around on weekends when it's driving. That's sort of been my hobby for a very long time. I like old Land Rovers. I don't know what drew me to them in the first case. Maybe some time I spent in Africa when I was a younger man, and maybe in some of the literature that I used to read about people having sort of adventures out, in remote parts of the world. The David Attenboroughs and all those used to sort of drive Land Rovers around when they were in their prime, and I've always liked them. Found this very old one here when I came to live here and spent more than a decade rebuilding it, and now it's it's a bit of fun on the weekends for things that I need to get to where I don't have to be particularly on time, and when it's good weather and not far from home, I take the old Land Rover. It's a 1955 Series 1 Land Rover, all original, but all rebuilt.
Just amazing. What I thought of when I saw that is you and I used to get around. We both used to be devotees of a rather famous 1950s comedy trio, I guess. Remember we used to talk about that, and that, of course, is the Goons. And I don't know why it just conjured up that memory when I saw that picture of the Jeep and those great times we had walking around talking about Goon shows back in the 80s.
Yeah, I'll have to call it Eccles or something.
Yes, there you go. I should really go back and listen to some of those shows. I probably would be quite entertaining.
Oh, it's amazing stuff.
Yeah.
Good memories there, Steve.
Yeah. Talking about the scouting organisation, I think I sort of moved on from that in the late 1980s, I suppose, and I went overseas as an exchange student, and I think life went in a different direction, and I guess that's where we probably lost contact. There was three of us, another gentleman by the name of Arthur, and I won't mention his surname because he might get a bit angry at me, but there was the three of us where all our birthdays are all within a week of each other, and we were such good friends. The scouting organisation, do you have much to do with that these days? Is it active in your local area?
It is active, and I support local scout groups as a local member of Parliament from time to time, helping them with sort of upgrades to their facilities and their fundraising events. And so I'm in awe of the people who give their lives and their time volunteering to support young people through Scout and through sporting organisations and all the other things. I think though that scouting is losing numbers here, and probably these things are cyclical, and there's lots of other pastimes and organisations and things like social media and social lives that compete for the attention of young people. But I think there's always a place for scouting. And what it offers young people in terms of experiences doing practical things in the outdoors together. And, I'll continue to support my local scout groups whenever I can. And, I say long live scouting. I think it's a fantastic movement. It's good for us, wasn't it?
It sure was, mate. It sure was. It's interesting. Both my children, who are now adults in their 20s, they both went through the Scouts, and in fact, one of those friendships they made resulted in a marriage. So
there you go.
It's a great organisation. It's certainly a lot different. Roger, I don't want to get bogged down in politics, but I am a bit of a political nerd, and I am fascinated by the Tasmanian electoral system. It's quite different. Can you explain to those of us in other states how that system works? How do you get elected in Tasmania? Is that a short conversation? I don't know.
It's not. How you get elected in Tasmania is you are passionate about your community. You get out into it. People see you and like you and vote for you. That's what happens in Tasmania.
Yep.
And I've had that honour 4 times in a row. And as a person who didn't grow up here, probably one of the second greatest honour in my life. The first is that my wife Steph agreed to spend her life with me. The second is that people who grew up in Tasmania elected me to be their representative in their parliament 4 times in a row. And I don't carry that lightly. That's a huge responsibility. What we've got here in Tasmania is multi-member electorates. So we have 5 electorates, each with 7 seats. Right. So in my electorate of Braddon, there are 7 members for Braddon, and I won't try to explain what's called the Hare-Clark voting system here because it'll take far more time than you've got. But I recommend that people look it up. It's quite a complex system, but in my view, compared to the way that we vote in federal elections and in most other states and territories, it's one where the voters' intentions are most closely followed down through the counting. So you don't have parties with how to vote cards and an order and a preset of preference distributions.
Mm.
You need to go into your ballot box and mark at least 7 people in your order of preference. And what happens is that when the person that you voted number 1 for has either been excluded because they didn't get enough votes or they've got enough votes to get a quota and be considered elected, your ballot paper is recounted and your second preference and your third preference, etc., are distributed. So your vote works pretty hard right throughout the counting, which can take several weeks in Tasmania. And to some extent, that means that our parliament more faithfully represents the intentions of the voters than many other election types, assuming, of course, that the voter had an intention in the first place. And what you can do, though, because we are a small population, we've got a large number of candidates and seats per head of population, probably more than most other places. You've got a very real chance of meeting and knowing the people who are putting themselves up for election each time. And some people make a point of doing that, and it's really welcome. And I, as a candidate, spent a lot of time throughout the term and especially during election campaigns, just being available for people to come and see, being where people are.
Yep.
And because here you can go into the booth having met everybody whose name is on the ticket. And I like that. I think that's a good, honest, fair income way of choosing your representatives. And it also keeps us honest because there's no anonymity. You are available to your electorate and accessible to it all the time. And when you've got your name on the side of the car, it makes you a better driver. You know?
So I suppose potentially that means that you could have a mix of people from different parties all in the one electorate, representing the one electorate. Is that right?
Correct. That's what we've got here now. We've got Liberal, Labor, we've got Jackie Lambie Network and an independent in Braddon.
That must make for an interesting dynamic at times.
Look, it is, but these are the people that our electorate put in our parliament. They expect us to work together, and that's what we do.
Roger, time is getting away from us a little bit. I really, I'm so glad we caught up. It's just something I've wanted to do this interview for a long time. I wish you continued success, and I'm going to have to get down to Tassie. It's been quite a few years since I've been there, and we should catch up.
Well, you come down, mate. We will find Visscher Island, and we will put our Sea Scout experience to work and build a canoe and paddle around your island.
Oh, those canoes, the things of nightmares, if I remember. Roger, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Steve. Take care, mate.
And, of course, if you want to have a good look at Roger's 1955, I think it was, Land Rover, then you can certainly find out about that and many other things about Roger's career, particularly if you live in that seat of Braddon, if you're listening in today. And his website, of course, is rogerjaensch.com.au. That's Jaensch. It was so great to catch up. You're listening to The Clear Signal. Coming up next, after the break, we'll be talking to longtime radio man Terry Daniel.
You're listening to The Clear Signal.
My guest in this second half of the show is a man who's not only made radio a big part of his life, but it's also part of a big family tradition. And just quietly, he's also quite the entrepreneur. He's currently the owner of Australian Independent Radio News. Terry Daniel, welcome to the show.
Hi, Steve. Yeah, thanks for having us on board.
Now we can both practice our big radio voices here because I'm a man who's fascinated with radio and later in my life have decided to try and kick off a career in it. But that's not true for you, is it, mate? You've been doing this for all your life.
Just about, yeah, since I left school. I must be honest and say a lot of people would be aware that I had two brothers that were involved in radio for nearly as long. As a matter of fact, we worked out just recently that we were approaching something like 130 years if you put all three of us together. And my middle brother, Richard, he was the one that really, when he was in school, wanted to be involved in radio. But of course, and I'm talking back in the 70s, most people at school had no idea how you would get involved in radio. They could tell you very much how you could be a vet or a doctor or a fitter and turner, but no one had much of an idea as to how you get into radio. So me being the older brother at the time, said, oh, well, I'll go and investigate. I'd finished school. I was doing a primary school training scenario at university. And I said, well, surely there's got to be something happening in Sydney where you can find out about that. So I went to the Federation of Australian Radio Broadcasters, FARB as they were known, and they said to me, oh, there's a few backyard people that do training. You know, they've got little studios set up in their backyards and you might be able to go to one of them and see how you could get involved. In the end, I found out that a gentleman by the name of Max Rowley's radio school, famous radio voice. He was the voice behind Perfect Match and, those, Come On Downs and all those sort of things. Max had a radio school running in Sydney, so I decided I'd go along and be a part of that. And then my brothers followed, and then my other brother, Glenn, obviously got involved in news in Sydney and did that for 38 years before he passed away a few years ago. And I guess all that started too originally in my bedroom where we basically set up a radio studio and we played radios because our favourite station back then in Sydney was 2UW, and they had some famous people that we'd listen to all the time. We'd go to their Sydney Royal Easter Show broadcasts and put our noses up against the glass and watch them broadcasting like kids did back in those days, and were fascinated by Top 40 and how it all worked, and started buying records and had equipment that basically allowed us to build a radio station in our bedroom and broadcast throughout the house by running wires under the house. When my parents weren't home, we'd drill holes in the floor and run wires under the house to speakers at various locations. I mean, how many homes these days we can go and sit in the back loo out the back and have a listen to the radio, blaring out through a speaker that was there, whether you liked it or not.
That's an interesting thing you say there, because I remember doing something similar in the 80s where I was just so fascinated with radio as a kid, and I thought, I would just set up a radio with a tape player in there and just pretend that I was broadcasting on a radio station. And we used to running wires under the house. That's a step up again, I must say. I can't imagine I did that, but interesting you talk about that sort of stuff now. How many of us now, I mean, I present this radio show from my home studio and you do a lot of work from yours. The technology, I touched on this with Darren Hinch just recently, where the change in technology is really amazing, and a lot of it has found its way into this industry.
Oh, totally. I mean, I was very lucky, I suppose, because I came the next thing. I mean, that was, I suppose, the good thing about it all was that this was basically a hobby. And I managed to go and do some training with Max Rowley for about 4 or 5 months. And that usually just involved turning up to his little studio and recording a pretend radio broadcast. And he would give you a critique on, he'd say, "Oh, Terry, your weather needs a little bit more light and shade, and the news needs to be affirmative and be a little bit more friendly with the audience," and all the little key buzzwords that he had on how to brighten your sound for radio. And then I eventually sent some cassette tapes out to different stations and was offered a job in Alice Springs, which is where I started, right in the centre of Australia, 8HA.
Wow.
But it amazed me when I sat back and I did my first shift at 8HA, and then not long after that they actually paid me. I thought, wow, this is amazing. Somebody's actually going to pay me some money to sit here and talk about music and play music to people, and that's a job. Wow. And it took me 4 months to do my apprenticeship, and basically within about 2 or 3 pays, I had my money back that I'd spent with Max, and it all came back. And then I thought, there ain't too many people out there these days that do an apprenticeship and get their money back in, 3 pays. Like, sometimes it takes years, especially if you're, going to be a vet or a doctor. You'd be looking at 6 or 7 years before you even start to get your first pay. So,
did your brothers go down a similar path? Did they go to radio schools as well, or did they sort of pick up on what you'd learned?
Richard went to radio school with Max for a little while, and then I got him a job at Alice Springs. So he came out to Alice Springs as well. And then after that, we went our separate ways. He went off to Colac in Victoria. I went off to Orange in New South Wales. And then my other brother, Glenn, he went down a different path. When he finished school, he went to the University of Technology in Sydney and actually did a journalistic course. So he was doing journalism, which covered print media as well as radio and even possibly TV if he wanted to move in that direction. But he then got involved. By that stage, I was at Orange and knew a few people at 2WS, which had not long started in Sydney. And that was one of Glenn's favourite stations as well, and introduced him to a few people, and he managed to get his first job at 2WS and went from there. So he came in the door a little differently. He came in with news. He was just really keen on news. Even when we had our pretend 2DD radio station in our bedrooms, Glenn was always the newsman. He was always doing stories that involved, it would have been probably the sports news was our game of cricket that we'd play out in the backyard, and he'd have all the scores, and I was Richie Benno or somebody, and that's right. My other brother was Kerry O'Keefe as a bowler, and Glenn would have all the scores and a cricket report as to how good the game was. So, I mean, we tried to do it as real as possible.
I have a theory, and I don't know what you think about this, Terry, but now I present this show from Melbourne. You've had a career in New South Wales, around the Sydney area, let's say. I have a theory that those two markets in particular are quite different in their expectations of radio and in the way radio is presented. I noticed subtly when I'm working with people at Air News, we've got people all over the country and everyone's got a different style, which I assume is based on the area in which they live and the market that's served by that.
Yeah, I guess that's very true. And I mean, even to this day now, with obviously the networking that goes on between Sydney and Melbourne and the rivalry that goes on there. There's a lot of evidence in the fact that you trying to run a show in Sydney with a Sydney audience, people in Melbourne aren't going to relate to that because they run a different sort of lifestyle. I mean, it's even the battle between Melbourne is supposedly the sports capital of the world. And,
yeah, come on, Terry. We all know that it is, Terry.
Even you've got better coffee, and in a way it goes.
Well, that's true too. Yeah. That's true too.
There's so many different things that carry on between that natural rivalry between New South Wales and Victoria that I guess, that does reflect it that way. And people do. I know when I've listened to announcers, on Melbourne radio, I've said to myself, that's not really for me. But I guess it's what I've been used to, and what I got brought up in Sydney was a different style altogether. Yeah.
And I've always struggled to put my finger on what exactly that is. I mean, I've been a long-time devotee of talkback radio here in Melbourne.
Yes.
And from time to time, we've seen Sydney personalities come to some of the bigger stations, and very few of them, in fact, I could perhaps only think of one who's actually done it the other way around, and that would be Steve Price, who's perhaps managed to sort of find a way to present in both markets. But
I mean, Lawsy just dominated Sydney, and I mean, even though he was in regional Victoria or regional stations around Australia, and I mean, let's face it, he's got the voice, so to speak, and had that knack of being able to interview and talk with people and make it entertaining. But I guess then in Melbourne, you had your own bunch of people that wouldn't have fitted in Sydney.
No, that's right. I mean, you could take a talk giant like, say, Neil Mitchell. His show, I don't think And I think I've even heard him admit this. I don't think it would work in the Sydney market or perhaps even in the Brisbane market. It's just it's just something to do with styling. All these years I've been a devotee of this sort of format. I've never been able to put my finger on exactly what that is, but it's really interesting. And John Law's the other way around. John Law's doesn't work in Melbourne. His style doesn't seem to suit the local market here. It's really strange.
Yeah, I think it might. Well, it's probably got something to do with lifestyle, by all means. I mean, it'd be interesting. There'd be some other interesting figures to look at too. Like, do Sydney people commute more than Melbourne people, or vice versa? Like, do you spend more time listening in your car, or do you spend more time listening in your home radio? Or, I mean, these days, of course, obviously now it's down to podcasts and all that sort of things as well. There are different ways you can listen. And of course, really, if you are in Melbourne or even if you're in Adelaide and you want to listen to what's going on in Sydney, that's very, very possible these days. Whereas for me to listen to what was going on in Melbourne, if I was in Sydney, I was very much removed from that. If I went on a holiday to Melbourne, I'd usually, want to listen to all the different stations, go around the dial. And then you'd say to yourself, well, gee, I don't know whether I could listen to this all the time.
The Clear Signal.
You're listening to The Clear Signal with my very special guest this week, the owner of Australian Independent Radio News and longtime radio man, Terry Daniel. Terry, you touched there on podcasting, and hasn't that been a real revolution in technology? I'm probably a little biased because that's the sort of the path that I've taken into radio, but it's really been a challenge to radio stations to adapt to a disrupting influence like this.
Yeah, indeed, Steve. And you were talking earlier about technology, and I was thinking too, I was very lucky when I got involved in radio and I came to Coffs Harbour to 2CS, which was a brand new station. And this is 1986. So we're just at the stage where computers were out there, and I was one of the first to buy a computer for the station. I can remember it was, back in those days, it was what was called a Pentium 3. Pentium 386 it was, yeah.
Good times.
And the cost was $4,311. I can remember to this day.
Maybe not so good times.
The reason I know that figure is because I ended up buying two. I bought one for myself, which was a huge chunk out of my pay packet. But, to have your own computer, and I'm talking about a computer that had a very small hard drive, very little tiny hard drive, and it was run on floppy disk, genuine 5.25-inch floppy disks. But the main reason stations had it was for their scheduling, to be able to schedule the radio commercials and sponsors and things in order so that, nothing was lost. So if you were a sponsor and you bought 30-second ads to run across a month, then you had to have them placed, and you then had to report back to the client where they were. And so a computer was the best way of doing it. So that's how we used it initially. And then I laugh when I think about it now as to how that progressed over that period of, while I was there for approximately 15 years, we went from a Pentium 386 right through to newer machines. And of course, by that stage, Windows came around. So we had Windows 95 and 98 and Windows Vista in 2000, and away it just kept going like it is now up to Windows 11, where now it's really easy to do what you and I do. We just sit here and we just press the record button and it gets recorded on a hard drive. And then we can play around with it later on. And if I go burp, you can remove the burps and all that sort of stuff. That back in the days back then it was on magnetic tape. And, if you really wanted to edit the burp out, you had to snip the tape and join it together again. So
yeah.
Aren't we lucky we're not doing all that nowadays?
I guess I never had the pleasure of doing that, but I think that would have driven me batty. It really is interesting. The person that's credited with starting podcasting as we know it is a former MTV VJ by the name of Adam Curry, known in some circles as the Podfather, I think he calls himself.
Right, yeah.
I've spoken to other people who go, oh, yes, we used to do file sharing and all that sort of stuff and distributing it. But I think he's certainly the man that is credited with making the sort of enclosure, the software enclosure that distributes people's podcasts now. And I think the interesting thing about radio stations is now they've had to adapt. And if you can't hear a show now, you've got the convenience of being able to listen to it later in that medium. So it's really a great thing. Yeah,
very much so. The same as our TV. I mean, how many times do most people now, watch a show at the time they want to watch it? Because they've got catch-up TV. You can go and see what happened already, or you've got a new series that's coming out that's purely available to you to binge on if you want to. It's a rainy Sunday afternoon and you want to watch 3 episodes. Go for it. We never had that luxury in the past. It was always, got to get the washing up and dinner all done by 7:30 because the the serial, that we've been following is on again tonight. And too bad if you had a meeting that night, you didn't get a chance to see it, and you had to ask somebody else what happened. So,
yeah, it's very true.
Yeah, no, radio has gone down that path as well. And you're absolutely right. We had to address that to be able to catch up on those and why shouldn't those fun bites that would be broadcast in breakfast be available again for those that weren't lucky enough to be up? Maybe you had a late night and you didn't, you slept through, or maybe you don't have to start work today till lunchtime. So you're not really a breakfast listener, but you can still enjoy some of that material later on.
Hey, Terry, you and I have a shared passion for aviation, and I hope people won't roll their eyes because I do tend to talk about flying a lot. But one thing you've been able to do, we've talked about this on my podcast in great detail on Plane Crazy Down Under, but let's have a chat about being an aerial traffic reporter, because combining flying with radio that's the perfect life, is it not?
Oh, here we go again, Steve. It's one of those scenarios where, as I said, I've been so lucky in my life that everything that I've managed to do as part of my career has really just started off as a hobby. And then to turn it into where you wake up in the morning and go, oh, right, it's something different again today. Radio was like that. Being involved with an IT computer business was very much like that, because you had to keep on top of all the latest trends. And at one stage, I was looking after 40-plus medical centres around Australia, so keeping up to date with medical software was another thing in itself. But going on to the aviation side of it, here I am working in radio in Coffs Harbour, and the local aero club and the chief air traffic controller in Coffs Harbour says to me, you know what? Radio needs an air patrol going up and down the beaches. We've got an ideal location here. We have that thing called the Pacific Ocean just out there, and it's full of nibblies like sharks, and it has dolphins, and it has people wanting to ride their surfboards in the corners and catch a wave here and there. We should be up in the air talking about what's going on. And I went, wow, how do we do that? Anyway, he organised it through the Aero Club, and I got my license. I got my private pilot's license. Thank you very much to the radio, and flying every day. I did this for about 7 years, I think it was, during summer. So virtually from October right through to the end of April, I would fly a Cessna 172 morning and afternoon, doing traffic and beach reports from the air. The other beauty thing about it was I always had a commercial pilot or instructor beside me, so that allowed me to clock up my hours. And then the other beauty thing we did was we managed to sell the 2 seats behind me to the general public listeners, and they came along for the ride as well and had a heap of fun. So it was a benefit to everybody, including me getting my license.
There's that comical idea where you're sitting, the private pilot is sitting on the plane, and, someone bursts through the cockpit door and says, is there anyone who knows how to fly this plane? And every private pilot would be like, yes, I have waited for this moment.
Yeah.
That would be kind of the same with you doing radio and say, hey, would you like to fly? It's like, sure, no problem. I can do that.
Twist my arm. Yeah. That was great. The other beauty thing about that too was because we had a commitment to do it every day, I flew in every weather. I mean, a lot of the students were very envious of me because some of the instructors would come out and go, oh, no, I can see thunderstorms brewing out the back there and there's big clouds coming in and the wind's picking up. No, we won't be doing any lessons today. It didn't worry me because it was a case of, right, we've got to go and do the air patrol. So out we went. And, we flew down towards those thunderstorms that were coming up from the south, and we dodged around them, and we had a few bumpy rides here and there. So I learned to fly in all sorts of conditions, which was good. To this day, I continue now. I'm probably one of the best people that knows the coast from Red Rock to the north of Coffs Harbour down to Nambucca Heads and Scott's Head to the south. I know it like the palm of my hand.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, especially where all the little beach bits and pieces were, and where could you go to find the sharks and the dolphins and all the rest of it. And we had some very interesting people come and fly with us too, and some fascinating stories as we're going along. I think I might have told this story to you once before about doing the run north and coming up to Woolgoolga, which is north of Coffs Harbour, and the back beach. And I had 2 dear ladies in the back, and they're killing themselves laughing. They're having a good old laugh, and I'm thinking, what the hell are they laughing at? I'm looking out there and I look out and I go, oh, no. There's a guy down on the back beach with his towel going, da-da,
oh, dear.
Hey, girls, have a look. It was like, and these 2 ladies were just killing themselves laughing at, what they could. Well, I mean, we're still at 300 or 400 feet up, so it's still a fair way away, but you
should have found that bloke and offered him a contract. You probably could have sold those seats for a lot more money in hindsight.
I guess so. Yeah, you get your free, strip show on the way.
Hey, Terry, some advice for young listeners who might be considering a career in radio. You talked a bit before about the concept of going out and working in more remote markets and working your way up. Is that still the way it's done? What advice would you give to someone who is just as fascinated as I was in radio and who perhaps doesn't want to procrastinate as many decades as I did?
Yeah, sure. Unfortunately, it's changed a lot now because our learning centres before were the regional markets. But in commercial radio, the regional markets, unfortunately, these days tend to be now dominated either by a Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane type scenario where everything's relayed out of the capital city out there. And maybe there's a local brekkie show, and that person probably doing that local brekkie show has probably been doing it for 20 years and, hasn't been kicked out yet. But as far as the rest of the station's concerned, all the material comes in from Cap City. So it's a lot harder. I guess the way nowadays, and this is where my current involvement is with community radio. Community radio is just a heap of stations that do all sorts of things differently, but they're very much locally and community-based within a certain area. And if I was a young person in a regional area and you wanted to give it a go and see what it was like, I'd be wandering down and offering your services to the local community station. Admittedly, you won't be working for any money probably. You'll be doing it for fun and free, but that's fine. If you really want to get going, that's a good way to do it. And also, hopefully, you'll find somebody within that station that's got experience and maybe has worked in commercial radio in the past that's happy to pass on some of those techniques and do critiquing. I guess the secret I'd say to anybody that if you do get a job in community radio, make sure you make a copy of your program, air check it, and get yourself to listen to it. Have a listen back to see what it sounds like, and also get somebody else to sit back with you and have a listen. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen enough these days, and people think, I'm doing a wonderful job, but hang on, wait a minute. Let's really go back and have a look at this. How could it be even better? So that would be my advice at the moment. And I guess, for some people, set up a studio in your bedroom like we all did and do some podcasts as well. There you go. There's an idea.
Terry Daniel, you're a good man and a good friend, and I know it's been a challenging few years for you with the loss of your two brothers. I'm glad we've been able to celebrate some of their achievements too in this chat today, and thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, you're welcome, Steve, and all the best too with Clear Signal. Looking forward to future episodes.
Well, that wraps up this week's edition of The Clear Signal. What a fun couple of discussions we've had this week. Really interesting catching up with Roger Jaensch MP and sharing some of those stories, particularly from our scouting days. I wonder, have you had similar experiences in organisations such as the Scouts? Drop us a line on our social media and let us know. I should have mentioned to Roger that if memory serves, I think I was a patrol leader back then, and I think he was my assistant patrol leader. I should have brought that up. Maybe I'll do that when I meet him, when we're taking our leisurely stroll around Visscher Island. Good Lord, in a canoe. Could you imagine that? Anyhow, that's everything we have for you this week. Thanks so much for joining us, folks. Until we talk again, have fun, stay safe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Get in touch. Join the conversation. Find us online at clearsignal.com.au.
Southern Skies Media.